Hi, I'm Alan Lyles. I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Our topic is Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Math Education, the Algebra Project, AI, and Mindset. Our webinar's focus is advancing equity and inclusion in math education. We do this through presenting an innovative use of AI to support the development of math educators, empowering teaching, MPT, providing an historical and currently relevant context through the experience of the Algebra Project, and highlighting insightful work on mindset in math education. Pandemic interruptions to school-based learning will continue to contribute to students' learning losses, compounding the gap for those who are already experiencing challenges. We address several initiatives that are part of the solution. This virtual conference is presented through the support of the Bank of America Center for Excellence in Learning, Teaching, and Technology at the University of Baltimore. A few organizational details. Our conference is being recorded, and afterwards a link to that recording will be sent to everyone who is registered. The times for today are approximate and may be affected by technology. If you have questions, please enter them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for one or two live questions following each speaker's comments and an open Q&A period following Alan Lyle's comments at the end. If your question is not answered live, we will do so after the event and share that with our attendees. First, a brief introduction for our speakers. I encourage you also to go to the speaker's webpage for more information and links to our speakers. Their lives and careers indicate in part directions to make a difference by example and in the learning environments that they create. First, President Kurt Schmoke. President Schmoke became the 8th president of the University of Baltimore in July 2014, following a career in politics and law. Kurt was mayor of Baltimore City for 12 years, and before that, he was the Baltimore State's attorney from 82 to 87. During his tenure as mayor, Mr. Schmoke initiated numerous programs in housing, education, public health, and economic development. In 1992, President George W. Bush awarded him the National Literacy Award for his efforts to promote adult literacy, and in 1994, President Bill Clinton praised his programs to improve public housing and enhance community economic development. In addition, he was appointed Assistant Director, White House Domestic Policy Staff under President Jimmy Carter and served as an Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Maryland. Mr. Schmoke has been Dean of the Howard University School of Law from 2003 to 2012, when he became General Counsel for that university. He is the member of multiple boards and associations. Our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Jing Liu, is Assistant Professor in Education Policy at the University of Maryland, College Park. Named as a National Academy of Education Sciences Spencer Dissertation Fellow, he earned his PhD in the Economics of Education from Stanford University in 2018. Dr. Jing Liu is an innovative researcher and educator whose goal is to improve learning opportunities for historically marginalized students in urban areas. Most recently, he was recognized as one of 30 winners in the Learning Engineering Tools Competition, a search for promising new and improved ideas, technologies, and platforms that will maximize student learning. Dr. Liu received $250,000 to develop Empowered Teachers, MPT, a machine learning tool for math instruction, measurement, and feedback. His work broadly engages with critical policy issues and uses both quasi-experimental designs and data science methods, such as computational linguistic analysis. Most of his current projects focus on understanding the development of student engagement, behavior, and social emotional skills, how these skills and dispositions contribute to student success both in the short and in the long term. His work has appeared in numerous peer-reviewed journals. And our next speaker Mr. William Bill Crombie, who is Director of Professional Development at the Algebra Project, Incorporated. Since 1990, Mr. Crombie has been involved in the development and delivery of professional material for teachers and the professional development of professional developers within the Algebra Project's national network. In collaboration with Bob Moses, the founder of the Algebra Project, Bill has worked on the development of the transition curriculum, short curriculum modules, and the African drum and ratios curriculum. He is also principal author of the Train the Trainers transition curriculum practice units and lecture notes, and the principal developer of the accessible calculus curriculum. Mr. Crombie has worked as a site development consultant to a number of school systems and communities across the nation in their efforts to establish local algebra projects. These include, in part, Boston, Cambridge, Chicago, North Chicago, Louisville, Los Angeles, Milwaukee, Marlborough County, and the list goes on. From 1994 to 98, he was the director of the Chicago Algebra Project. Overall, his work has focused on increasing access to quality mathematics education for students from underserved communities. And last, although I'm moderator, I will also be one of the speakers. And I can say that as a Baltimore City Public School student from grades 1 through 12 and a Baltimore Polytechnic Institute graduate in 1968, I understand that math instruction in schools must span at least several levels of current student preparation and their potential trajectories. However, gaps in math education and achievement are not random. They reliably vary by socioeconomic, race and ethnicity, and sex, and these differences may even be widening. My passion project is to identify and provide a forum for insights from innovative educators, programs, and technologies for more effective math education. It has been a privilege to get to know our speakers and others who have generously introduced me to additional dimensions of the topic that we're talking about today. With that, it is my honor to introduce the president of our university, Mr. Kurt Schmoke, to welcome you.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. Greetings and welcome to the University of Baltimore's webinar, Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Math Education, the Algebra Project, AI, and Mindset. Disparities exist in math achievement. As we know, these gaps have persisted far too long, and recent events such as the pandemic and departure of experienced educators have only exacerbated them. Without major change, there will be more loss of talented young learners unable to navigate the typical math curriculum with its rigid sequential approach to math education. However, Mr. Robert Moses, legendary civil rights activist, MacArthur Genius Award recipient, and founder of the Algebra Project, championed mathematics literacy as a civil right for all public school children. Our webinar is grounded in the Algebra Project's foundation, which recognizes the critical importance of mathematics literacy and its role in advancing civil rights. We are excited to introduce Empower Teaching, an AI system that supports the development of skilled math educators and to elevate the importance of mindset for math learning, achievement, and teaching. We're proud to host a diverse group of speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience. Today's topics, as Alan noted, included our keynote, Harnessing the Power of Artificial Intelligence to Support Teachers, a novel tool for mathematics instruction, measurement, and feedback. This next, why would anyone do it that way? Bill Crombie will speak on that topic. And then bring it together, CELTT webinars, implementation, and more needing to be done, which will be discussed by Alan Lyles. As a university committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, the University of Baltimore is uniquely situated to convene and contribute to this discussion. We invite you to continue the conversation beyond this webinar and to join us in our efforts to promote equity, justice, and inclusion in education. I hope you find our webinar stimulating and informative, that it offers valuable lessons and resources for addressing the challenges that we all face in expanding equity and inclusion in math education. And now Dr. Lyles, our moderator, will introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jing Liu. Alan?
Thank you, Kurt. Jared, if you could transition for Dr. Liu to present, and Jing, if you want to load your PowerPoint into presentation mode.
Okay, let me do it.
It's our honor to have Dr. Jing Liu present on what is a currently field-tested product in artificial intelligence. Quite timely. And Jing, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Alan Lyles and the University of Baltimore's invitation to be in this webinar. It's really my honor to be here. I'm really excited to share this new work. Actually, I'm presenting this, but it's actually a product of a really big team, including Professor Heather Hill from Harvard University, Dora Damsky from Stanford, and there are numerous other collaborators who are behind this work. So my name is Jing Liu. I'm currently on the faculty of the University of Maryland, and I'm a research associate at the IZA Institute of Labor Economics. So today I'm really excited to share this topic, this talk entitled Harnessing the Power of Artificial Intelligence to Support Teachers, a Novel Tool for Mathematics Instruction Measurement and Feedback. So I'm gonna start by talking about how AI, artificial intelligence, has revolutionized many aspects of our lives. So a lot of you who are watching this webinar probably have been have heard about this ChatGPT tool. If you have played with it, you are probably equally impressed as I am about how ChatGPT is able to understand and produce human-like language. But ChatGPT is just one example of AI. There are numerous other examples of AI that has really transformed our life. For example, self-driving cars, chatbots you talk to during online shopping, virtual reality, and even medical diagnosis now is really supported by AI. So it's exciting, but at the same time, I know that the general public also share a lot of concerns about AI, which is really understandable. So first, there are numerous ethical and social implications of AI. So one big example is people worry that AI will replace human-based jobs, right? That's one example. Some AI algorithms also are biased and can discriminate against minorities groups. People also worry that AI can threaten the security and privacy of personal data. A lot of AI algorithms also like transparency, and we don't know what's actually happening beneath the algorithm. There's also a lot of potential misuse and malicious use of AI. So what I want to share in this talk is that despite all these concerns, it is actually possible. So my work has shown that it is possible to harness the power of AI to support teachers in a way that we can achieve more effective and equitable instruction. And this talk is gonna share with you about how we achieve that. So my focus of using AI to support teaching is to provide teachers with valuable feedback. So why do we want to do that? There's actually a lot of research that has shown that feedback is important for student learning and also for teachers to teach. Providing teachers with formative feedback, which is not evaluated, so it's kind of in contrast to summative feedback. So formative feedback can really improve both teachers' instruction and also their students' outcomes. So what is formative feedback? Formative feedback is defined as non-evaluative, supportive, timely, and specific. So the intention is not to evaluate the teacher by saying that you are good or bad, but with the intention to modify teachers' thinking or behavior to improve their teaching. However, in the US public systems, few educators actually receive this kind of feedback on a regular basis. On average, a teacher generally receives once or twice of this kind of feedback. And when they receive this kind of feedback from their coaches or principals, they often report this feedback has very low utility or is not super useful for them. And only 40% of schools provide teachers access to a math or reading coach. And those math and reading coach, they also spend very limited time on instruction. So that's basically the reality. And in practice, how do teachers get feedback? It's actually relying on a human scoring system in which human readers go into a classroom or watch a classroom video and rate teaching based on a prescribed observational protocol. And this kind of human scoring of classroom has been used in describing what's happening in a classroom, to evaluate interventions, and also giving teacher feedback. So this kind of is what's going on in reality. But human-based scoring of classrooms is very expensive. It requires a lot of resources to go into training readers, developing those observational protocols, and also convert them into useful information. So you will see that schools and districts that have limited resources, they cannot afford this kind of practice. Basically, this work, empowering teachers, its aim is to combine cutting-edge machine learning techniques, natural language processing, which is kind of a branch of artificial intelligence, and its main use is to leverage computers to understand human-based language. And we are going to combine the cutting-edge techniques and sound education theory to produce a mechanism that is both scalable and theoretically theory-driven. And we are going to use this by combining this different knowledge and tools. We're going to create classroom measures which will enable us to deliver effective feedback to teachers with a goal to improve their instruction practice. So from now, I'm gonna share with you how we realize this ambitious goal by using a specific example, as how we give teachers feedback on their uptake of student ideas, which is a pretty complex teaching practice. So what is uptake? So it doesn't sound familiar to many of you, I assume, but let's look at one example. So a student here indicates a student. Say I added 30 to 70. Then you can imagine in your mind like how a teacher is going to respond to that statement. A teacher might respond by saying, "Okay, that's acknowledging what the student said, right?" Or and you got what? That's kind of inviting the student to collaborate and complete the sentence. Or by saying, "Okay, you added 30 to 70. That's not very exciting, but it's like repeating what students said, and it also shows that teacher has heard the student voice. Or reformulation by saying, "Good, you did the first step." Or elaboration, by asking a question, "Where did the 70 come from?" So you can see those kind of responses all show some ways to capture what the student said and move the instruction forward. So this is uptake. It actually captures how teachers acknowledge, repeat, reformulate, and elaborate a student idea, and use that student idea as a resource to move instruction forward. So decades of research has shown that uptake has a positive association with student learning and also achievement across a range of learning contexts. And it's also among the most difficult teaching practice to change, possibly because it's really complex. As you can see, I'm already listing many different options of uptaking a student idea. And given its complexity, it's really hard to measure it by using human readers, and also very hard to change a teacher's behavior on uptake. So my team measures uptake using natural language processing. So we developed an unsupervised machine learning model to capture this phenomenon in classroom. Essentially, to make it really simple, this algorithm does not rely on human annotation, but it learns to estimate the extent to which a teacher's response is really specific to a student idea. So I won't go into the details about this, but that's kind of how we measure uptake by using classroom conversations. We train this model on combination of 3 large corpora of interactions. Basically, we use both mathematical classrooms, but also a few other teaching and learning settings to train this model to capture exactly what we want in terms of uptake. Then we also validate this measure by comparing its performance with other possible models and also correlate the yielded measures on uptake with a range of teaching practices across a range of learning settings to confirm it is actually performing well. So we find that this measure actually has a pretty high precision. It's on par with human annotation. And if you are interested in how we create this measure, we have this paper already published. It shows how we actually measure uptake. But we are pretty confident about the performance of this measure at this point. So given we already built this measure based on classroom verbal interaction between student and teachers to measure uptake, how are we gonna deliver feedback on uptake to teachers? The first step is we're gonna record a classroom so that we can have the verbal interactions between the teacher and students. Acknowledgeably, verbal interaction is one aspect of teaching, right? So there are a lot of things that are not verbal in teaching, but we are gonna just focus on verbal interaction for now, and we are gonna expand the tool to capture other like visual cues, how the teacher is working with the blackboard, etc. But now we're gonna focus on this verbal aspect. So we're gonna record a classroom, then we're gonna transcribe the classroom and anonymize that to make sure it's protected, the privacy is protected. Then we're gonna conduct this transcript analysis, basically feed the transcript into our machine learning algorithms and measure how many times the teacher is demonstrating the uptake phenomenon. Then we're gonna deliver the feedback to teachers. So basically that's kind of 4 steps we use to deliver, to measure feedback, to measure uptake and also provide feedback to teachers. So how do we deliver this feedback? We have a few design principles. So first is we want this feedback to be really non-judgmental and private. So I'm gonna show you some examples of that. So you can see that we tell teacher upfront that this feedback is not meant to be an evaluation, but it's really to offer you an opportunity to reflect and support your PD. We also provide them these reflection questions so that they can have some space to think about what they have been doing in their class. We also want our feedback to be really concise, specific, and actionable. This is really the key of providing formative feedback that is kind of really conducive to behavioral change. So we tell the teacher how many times we have found that they are building on their student contribution. So this is just another way of saying its uptake. So we tell the teacher how many times they have been doing this. We also give them the exact examples of their own classroom on how they are demonstrating uptake by using the transcripts from their own classroom. So they can actually review in which moments they are demonstrating uptake. Then we told them which strategies they were using to uptake student ideas and also give them examples. So you can see it's very detailed. It's not just an abstract number, but it's really building on what they did in their prior class. So the last principle is to make it timely and regular. As I mentioned, that on average, teacher only receives feedback once or twice a school year. That's far from sufficient. So we provide feedback on a weekly basis, so teachers can see how they are doing really frequently. So this is basically a web application of how we deliver the feedback through email. We send this email to the teacher and they can see their performance on various metrics and examples and also reflect on how they are doing. This is just one example of how we use our algorithm to deliver feedback. So we have this design principle, we have this measure. How does it work? And does it work at all? We conducted this experiment with a platform called Code in Place, which is actually not a math classroom. It's actually a computer science class. but it shares many similarities with online math teaching. So Coding Place is developed by Stanford University. Its goal is to democratize coding to the world. And we conduct this large-scale randomized control trial in the spring of 2022. And it includes 12,000 students in this class and also 1.2 thousand instructors. So it's a pretty large-scale experiment. So as I mentioned, this goal is to democratize access to teaching and learning on how to code, and it's a 5-week online course by Stanford. Our design is to offer this feedback about uptake to every instructor, but we randomly assign half of the instructors to receive an email reminder about their feedback. So that will induce them to be more frequently interact with the feedback, which provides us some kind of variation to use to estimate how our feedback is going to change their behavior. And we provide feedback on a weekly basis. So every week they finish their instruction, we're going to deliver this feedback. So our finding is has shown very promising effects of this kind of delivering automated feedback to instructors. We found that this tool, we call them empowering teachers, actually increased treated instructors' uptake of student contribution by 13%. Very importantly, not only this is a very impressive number, given how hard it is to change a teaching practice like uptake, but also what's really encouraging is we found that the improvement on uptake is driven by instructors asking open-ended questions. So it's more sophisticated strategies that's driving the change rather than repeating what students said. As I mentioned, uptake can be demonstrated in very interesting ways, like repeating what students said, but it can also be a more sophisticated strategy, like asking questions. So we see that this is not driven by just repetition, but more important, more sophisticated strategies. And lastly, we also find suggestive evidence on improved student learning outcomes, like assignment completion, and also how well they perceive the course. Overall, it's pretty encouraging, although it's not math, it's computer science, and it's an online course. But I think this is a proof of concept and shows that how we can leverage this AI tool to deliver effective feedback and also improve teaching. So the big takeaway of this study is that it is possible to effectively deliver feedback to teachers at scale using automated tools in an online teaching setting. So this is one study we have just finished, and we are actually working with district in Utah and trying to use the same tool to improve mathematics teachers' practice in K-12 classes. So that's what's going on right now. We don't have results to report, but I want to just mention that it's going on and we probably will have results very soon. And I want to mention a few next steps based on what I just introduced. One is data collection. Actually, this very field of that resides as an intersection of AI and education is very new. It's still in its infancy. So a big barrier of the development of this approach and this field is that there's lack of data to support this work. So the Gates Foundation and my research team and there are a couple other funders, we are working together to collect high quality classroom recordings for 300 to 350 mathematics teachers across the nation. So we can build a high quality data set that allows us to expand the work we are doing. Second, we want to build additional measures in mathematics classrooms. As Alan just mentioned, this empowering teacher tool actually just won a global education technology competition, and their funding is going to support us to develop those extra measures that one, we can measure talk moves or teaching strategies that support equity. Second, we are going to measure the density of mathematical terms that appear in a classroom, which importantly represents the learning opportunities for students. Third, students' mathematical reasoning. So how much we see students are reasoning using mathematical language in classrooms. So we're going to build the 3 strands of measures so that we can not only learn about what's going on in math classrooms, but also deliver this kind of feedback to teachers and improve the corresponding teaching practice. Third, we want to gain more insight into how feedback can best be crafted to elicit teacher attention and behavioral change. So what we show is in an online setting, it's relatively easy to record classroom. It's relatively easy to deliver feedback through email. But in K-12 teaching setting, it's a lot more complicated given how overwhelmed, how burned out our teachers are, and how can we fit this tool into their busy schedule. And lastly, as I mentioned, we are extending empowering teachers to the K-12 public school sector and testing its feasibility and effectiveness. So this is my presentation. I hope this brings us all hope that we can harness the power of artificial intelligence and use this tool for instructional measurement and feedback and improve teaching in a way that to make instruction more effective and also equitable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jing. That's actually quite encouraging, and much of what we hear about AI is quite frightening. So I'm looking to see if, before we move to Mr. Bill Crombie, if there are any questions from our audience, and I don't see him at the moment. I would like to ask one question. You started with K-12 range, and now when you have calibrated, do you need to calibrate separately for high school, undergraduate, graduate?
Absolutely. So we need to calibrate both the measure and also the way we deliver feedback, because we can, it's very different to teach in, for example, one-on-one tutoring. It's different to teach one teacher to 25 students in K-12 classrooms. It's also super different to be teaching in college classrooms with one teacher and many students. So the dynamics will be different, the content will be different. We need to calibrate our measure using the exact database collected from the corresponding setting. And also we need to really understand the teaching context and deliver feedback in a way that is conducive for teachers in behavioral change. Yeah.
And one last question before we turn it to Mr. Crombie, and that is about administrative load or cost. Sometimes with software or other systems that are designed to support and improve the quality of math education and instruction, it is prohibitively costly, either in terms of the resources of personnel needed or in terms of the commercial charges. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So the upfront investment for this tool can be pretty high, because if we want high quality classroom recording, we probably need to invest in those equipments and set them up in the classroom. And that can be pretty costly. But the good news is once we set up the system, everything else will be close to zero cost, because once the algorithm is already built, you just use it like and we make all our algorithm open sourced. So it doesn't really charge anything from the user. So I think the upfront is expensive, but it can be used for the long run, and also the marginal cost is close to zero. The other is we are also working with a couple of industry partners. One partner is in Silicon Valley, is a Silicon Valley startup called TeacherFX. So what they do is a teacher can actually record their classroom using their cell phone, and everything is delivered through an app. So that's actually much cheaper. Although we can imagine that recording classroom using cell phone, it won't give you the same high quality classroom recording compared with the dedicated instruments in a classroom. But I think given how fast AI and technology are developing, I think I'm hopeful that the cost will basically decrease pretty linearly and dramatically over time. And it will be, I think it's time to really invest in this research. And by the time that everyone can really, every district and school can invest in this with pretty affordable prices, this will be really benefiting all the teachers who need this kind of feedback and who want to have enhanced professional development.
Thank you, Jing. And now
Thank you.
I would like to turn to Mr. Bill Crombie, who will, speaking from his experience in the Algebra project and in the classroom, address some historical aspects of attempting to do what you were working on, Jing, with modern technology, and that is how can we have rigor and equity in the types of math instruction that's available so that people will work hard and succeed rather than being held back by the things that happen outside the classroom. Bill, did I give a fair introduction for what you're going to be talking about?
Yes, good. And I'm going to use a whiteboard, and that means I'm laying my laptop down. So I just warn you, I'm turning off my camera, or else you'll be staring into the light on the ceiling. Let's see. Does
I can see your whiteboard, Bill.
you see my whiteboard?
I can see it.
Good. And now let me just make sure that I can write with it. Good. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. As Alan said, my name is Bill Crombie. I work with the Algebra project. The Algebra project is a small nonprofit in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We've worked for some 40-odd years to raise the floor of math literacy for all children in the U.S. public school system, but especially for those students most underserved and underperforming. I want to describe an event from a few years ago that captures, excuse me, some critical issues that students and teachers face in mathematics classroom. The event itself took all of 5 minutes, but we'll walk through it in a kind of slow motion to see what it reveals. But first, a little history. So I'm old enough to remember coming out of, the new math of the 60s and the back to basic movement of the 70s. In 1980, NCTM, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, put forward what they called an agenda for action. The agenda for action said that mathematics instruction should be centered around problem solving. It is actually considered the beginning of the standards movement, leading all the way up, to our present Common Core. Now, I don't know if we ever landed close to that problem-solving target, but over the years, mathematics and its instruction in the classroom has been moving increasingly towards exercises, in the sense that in a problem, the method of solution is not known in advance, while an exercise practices an algorithm or a rule or procedure. And unfortunately, presently, most algebra students are practicing the applications of rules, not problem solving. To engage in problem solving, you need what we call an ill-defined domain. An ill-defined domain is one where the structure and the methods of solution are not given to the learner in advance. Importantly, an ill-defined domain, sorry for my phone, an ill-defined domain really has the space for the exercise of both imagination and creativity. Most of the so-called problems that our students get in, say, Algebra 1, and that's what I'll be focusing on, are in fact well-defined domains. They are well-defined domains in the sense that everyone knows, may not be able to do, but everyone knows what the algorithms or rules are that will be employed. They are given by the chapter title, right, in the Algebra 1 book. They are given by the standards that are written on the board at the beginning of class. They typically call for the careful execution and repetition of the steps in an algorithm. They do not call for an exercise of imagination and creativity. I have to tell you, usually when I go into a school, I take a quick informal survey of students. And this consists of asking them for your major content areas, English language arts, history, natural science, and mathematics. Where do you rank those areas as opportunities for your exercise of imagination and creativity? And as you can probably guess, mathematics has really consistently fallen at the bottom, right, of that survey. So the story that I want to share is about how math is presently done in classrooms all over this country, more so in some classrooms and in some communities than in others. And we'll get back to that question of particularity. But more to my story, a few years ago, I was working with the school in Brooklyn. I visited the school once a month. I was working with the 9th grade teachers and their students. And we were about halfway through the school year when this incident occurred. One morning, I'm in an Algebra 1 class. The students were coming in, and the teacher put an equation on the board and asked the students to solve it. You know, it's typically called a do now or warm-up exercise, and it's meant to get students to start thinking about the mathematics that they'll be engaged in during that period. So the equation that the teacher put on the board was something like this. Let me see. There you go. 10 minus x is equal to a -5. Now, some of you might remember your own experience of going to the board to solve an algebra equation, you know, with very little or a lot of understanding of what the task was all about. As I tell you this story, try to bear that memory in mind and contrast it with what happens in this story. The teacher almost asked for a volunteer to come to the front and share what they had done. But for some reason, and I'm not sure if the thinking behind it, she picked a girl that didn't even raise her hand when she asked for volunteers. The girl went up to the board, took the marker, and she knew the first step. As teachers tend to say, we want to get x by itself on one side of the equation. So the girl subtracted 10 from both sides of the equation, and she ended up getting something like this. Now, she did know that the addition of those two negative numbers gives a -15. So she ends up with, starting with 10 minus x is equal to -5, minus x is equal to -15. She then froze like a deer staring into oncoming headlights. Now, without telling her directly, the teacher tried to suggest what the next step might be. And as an audience member watching this, it seemed like this coaxing really went on forever. I can't imagine how long it felt to the girl who's at the board. But here's part of the difficulty the girl was facing. The equation was originally subtracting x from 10, but now it was subtracting x from nothing. What in the world do we do with that? The teacher finally got her to divide both sides of the equation by -1. Looks something like that. And she did know again that a negative number divided by a negative number was positive. The answer she got was x is equal to 15. And she genuinely looked relieved that it was over. It's also important to note that the type of equation she was asked to solve is called a two-step equation, because the algorithm students practice in solving these equations involves two steps, right? In this case, there was a subtraction and a division. And of course, there are one-step equations that students did before they got to this, and multi-step equations that they would get to after this. This domain is highly structured in an algorithmic sense. They're actually the procedure named. Excuse me? The procedure is named by counting the steps. You literally count each step as it's being done. It's almost like the dancing by numbers. If you remember those numbered footprints on the floor, it's almost there. The do now is usually followed by the next algorithm and procedure to be considered in the district scope and sequence. And this scenario happens hundreds of thousands of times in classrooms across America. This focus on algorithms and procedures has consequences. I had recently looked up data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, their 2019 report, which was prior to COVID. And that report says that the 12th grade NAEP mathematics achievement level has 32% of white 12th graders at or above proficient. NAEP defines proficiency as demonstrating solid academic performance and competence in challenging subject matter. That's less than 1/3 of graduating white students in the US are prepared to go on to challenging subject matter in mathematics. 32% is nothing to write home about. But wait, it gets worse. Blacks performed at 8%, Hispanics at 11%, and Native Americans at 9%. If you think about that, this says that 92 out of every 100 Black graduating 12th graders are not prepared for challenging mathematics or the STEM fields that depend upon that mathematics. And, I think we really need to picture this. If we were talking about language arts literacy, we would be referring to a time when only 8 out of 100 young people could read beyond a simple primer. Now, I certainly don't think that everyone should become a mathematician or choose a STEM career. I do believe that there are literally thousands of good reasons for not going into STEM. I've only found one bad reason for not going into a STEM field. And that one bad reason that I found is caught in the phrase, I simply was not prepared.
Mhm.
Which all too often means I couldn't handle the mathematics. But when we look at this, I think with percentages this low, the problem is that most students simply do not have a choice. Percentages this low go beyond the preparedness issue of individual students. This is a systemic, institutional dysfunction. You know, Bob Moses, the founder of the Algebra Project, used to characterize this situation as sharecropper education. And what he meant by this sharecropper education was and still is an arrangement where communities of color, primarily communities of color, are systematically denied access to levels of literacy within the educational system, only to have those same levels of literacy used as conditions for either blocking or enabling greater participation in the system. You know, but my story in the classroom doesn't end there. The girl was ready to sit down, but I raised my hand and the teacher called on me. And I asked the girl, can you draw the picture that equation describes? She actually looked relieved that that was all I was asking her. She did. And, you know, this is how she did it. Let's see. Let me explain a bit first. She and her class were thinking about these types of equations as describing trips, believe it or not. They were thinking about equations as describing trips because the idea of a trip was something that everyone understood. It made sense from their everyday lives. They naturally understood what a trip was and what it entailed. The idea, in this case, in this mathematics class, the idea of a trip was acting as a grounding metaphor to make the abstract symbols of algebra concrete and meaningful. Now, it was a subtraction equation that she was working with. So instead of thinking of subtraction as takeaway, right, that was the model from elementary school, she and students in her class were rethinking the notion of subtraction as a comparison. And we can think about this idea of comparison like this. You know, you can imagine if the equation that you see to the left over there is the answer to a question on Jeopardy, then what question is that an answer to? And one way of framing this is the question, well, where is location 10? And the immediate issue there is, well, the location of 10 depends upon where you start from, its relative position. The equation says that we're starting from location X. 10 compared to X is equal to a -5. The picture, the model, the grounding metaphor that they're using for subtraction is this idea of comparison. And it's the idea that the finish of a trip compared to the start of a trip, that is the location of 10 compared to the location of X, is simply the movement that takes you from the start to the finish. In this case, it's a -5. It's 5 to the left. So the picture that she drew was this: the location of 10 compared to the location of X is 1 to the left, and it is 5 units or 5 stops to the left. So after she drew that picture, I asked her, so what is the location of X? She looked at the picture again, and she immediately said, oh, X has to be 15. That is an example of math literacy. By math literacy, we mean the ability to read, write, and reason with the symbol systems of mathematics. This student had a very limited ability to manipulate symbols without meaning, but she could easily read and reason about the symbols that meant something. And, you know, from an algorithmic perspective, I still wonder if anyone can count the steps involved in finding the solution to the equation in this way. In some ways, this is much simpler than the two-step algorithm. But in other ways, it's much more sophisticated. Most importantly, when she solved the problem in this way, she actually understood what she was doing and what her answer meant. But I have to tell you, before she sat down, I asked her to look over at the calculation she had just done, and she did a kind of double take. She looked over, then looked back at the picture. She looked over again, and then looked back. And then she turned around facing me and pointed to the calculation, and she said, why would anyone do it that way? And I have to tell you, I told her, I really don't know. But her question was important. It was implicitly raising a demand for a quality education in the mathematics classroom. It implicitly said that doing mathematics should not make students feel stupid, confused, or discouraged. It implicitly said that doing mathematics should be as easy as reading what is there and figuring out answers that make sense. And it's for that reason that Bob Moses had said that math literacy is the key to 21st century citizenship. Personally, I believe that we all need to ask that question until we get a good answer. Why would anyone do it that way? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And we have a comment from one of my colleagues, Dr. Kelechi Uzochukwu, and she says, what a great, powerful example, Dr. Crombie. That's, I was wondering where your title came from and where you were going with it. A question for you before I say a few things, and that is, Bill, given the numbers that you started with, what can the Algebra project do with its pedagogy to start to turn that around?
Well,
a couple of things. You know, we always say that learning should begin in the place where the learner is.
Mhm.
And that is why, and if you look at the Algebra project's pedagogy, the most important mathematical concepts that we want students to learn. So it's not many of them. It may be, you know, half a dozen. The central, you know, what understanding by design used to call the big ideas that they should carry with them.
Mhm.
We've been working across those 40 years to make sure that we have an experiential foundation that is accessible to all students, and especially the lowest performing students, right? That's accessible to those ideas through a concrete shared experience. You know, I think there's now, at least nominally, agreement that we should not approach student learning with a deficit model. But the question is, well, so where are the strengths?
Mhm.
And, you know, our late founder, Bob Moses, he had a background, not only he was teaching mathematics in New York City before he went to Mississippi. When he came back from Africa in the 80s, he was studying the philosophy of mathematics as a graduate student at Harvard. And I think both his experience in Mississippi and his studies in the philosophy of mathematics and that experience in the classroom said that all students do come with strengths. And one of the most overlooked strengths that all students have is the logic that is embedded in the language that they speak. And I think we aren't really exploiting that to the degree that we should. So after that experience, we don't jump into the math. If there's a shared concrete experience, we want students to draw pictures of it, to write about it, and to talk about it in what we call people talk, because that is a strength that all students bring. And giving the student an opportunity to reflect upon their own language creates a domain of imagination and creativity, which is also an essential to doing mathematics, English, social studies, or science. If we so strip those disciplines of that most human capability, of course, students are not going to learn well. So those are the elements that I think the Algebra project is most concerned with. And I should mention, you know, implicit in that kind of work is not a picture of the isolated student working alone. It's the concrete shared experience.
Yeah.
It's students making an investment, not only in their own understanding, but in the understanding of their classmates,
right,
and to really build that knowledge foundation.
Bill, one more question before I say my few comments. And this one has both numbers, but also requires insightful judgment. One of my colleagues has written, Baltimore City Schools' most recent citywide math testing for 3rd through 8th grades yielded a 7% proficiency, half of pre-pandemic proficiency, which was 14%. With a budget of approximately $20,000 per student, does this outcome likely reflect the teaching or the testing or both or neither?
Yes. From my opinion, I'm affirming the disjunction. Look, when you see scores that low, as I was saying, it's a systemic, it is an institutional issue. And to say it's an institutional issue, an easy way out for the institution is to say, my teachers aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. That is not how you resolve an institutional issue. I don't know if I'm going to say this, but let's keep this just between us. You know, in the US military, when there's an institutional issue, they don't remove the troops. They change the leadership, right? They get leadership in there, right, that can reorganize human effort.
Right.
And believe me, I'm surprised to find myself using a military example, but they get leadership in there that can reorganize effective human effort to get the job done. Both teachers and students are too often the scapegoat for data like that. I mean, I think it basically says that all of us, in some way, have to collaborate, work together. But at least from our perspective, and this is really a lesson that Bob took out of the civil rights struggle, the people that are most affected by the problem need to be active at the center of the solution, need to have agency at the center of the solution. And, you know, those are teachers who struggle with their students and those broader communities. If they're not there, you don't have the necessary condition for finding a solution.
If I could, Bill, I'm not proposing that you start an entirely new entity, but that sounds like the accountability project.
That's actually a good idea.
We have an observation from another of my colleagues. She says, I love this. Students so often struggle with the invisible math. For example, minus x equals left paren minus 1, right paren, left paren, x, etc., but are rarely encouraged to think outside the proverbial box. We get conditioned at such a young age to believe here is only one way to solve a problem. I'll leave that as an observation. Thank you for sharing. And I have a few comments to make, and then we'll have, if we have time, an open Q&A. So, Jared, do I share my screen?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
I sure can.
Okay. And I'm assuming everyone can. What I want to do first is iterate what I said at the beginning. It's been an honor to get to know the people I'm on the panel with today and those of prior years. There is exciting work being done, but this is seen as a niche area, which I'm hoping it will not be. I believe that what Mr. Moses said is a civil rights issue, and that's math literacy, could be understood that way, and that the types of initiatives and the way in which these are being approached could be more broadly disseminated. That's why I found it so exciting what Jing was doing with his work and talking about at scale, because we're so limited with the master math teachers who can tutor and guide and give the feedback to culture this next generation of effective teachers. And Bill, with the numbers that you were talking about, I am keenly respectful that many students come from lives in chaos, and chaos doesn't know gender, doesn't know race, doesn't know ethnicity, and they arrive in the classroom where the classroom might be more a safe haven than a place for learning. So that's part of the challenge. But if we take that as an acknowledgement and then say, what have I been doing these past 3 years as a CELTT fellow with this as a particular focus, with this as a passion project? Let's get started. The last 3 years, we've had these webinars, and they have had, as today, luminaries, Dr. Ronnie Ellington from Morgan State, Dr. Ed Ray Goins, Representative Dale Johnson from Arizona State University, et cetera. We've looked, if we go back to 2021, at the challenge that is layered on from what we've talked about today, when suddenly everything had to go online. I would say that as we follow that forward, what's going to make that particularly problematic is that for younger students who didn't have the opportunity for socialization to education, the learning loss there will ripple out for at least a generation of students coming through and may require special approaches to correct that. Then last year, we focused more specifically then on the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the reasons that we've been talking about today. What we came up with is that there can be purposeful technology. And there I was thinking about adaptive learning, but Jing, the purposeful technology is also the AI that you're talking about and the applications that you mentioned. What I would say is a challenge then, if Bill, we talk about the accountability project, is how do we align that pedagogy across the curriculum? Estelle Woodbury, whom I spoke with, who was at Stanford and part of U Cubed, which is a company that addresses this, and she has focused in her education and work on equity in mathematics education. This idea of aligning means that there's ownership and there's collaboration among teachers, and it's almost like a bottom up, but it's shared with students. That's what we spoke about last year. This year, you can see where we've gone, and I've tried to span from the beginning to now with the Algebra project, cutting edge results with AI. And now when we talk about mindset, we'll get to that in just a few slides, but I wanted to acknowledge that we've spoken a lot about Mr. Moses. I can't call him Bob because I didn't know him, and I have too much respect for him for that. But his observations from Mississippi, I think, echo today also and resonate as true. If we look at your work, Dr. Liu, we can see that there is a better way, and there's, as you accumulate more evidence, the challenge may be, how do we disseminate that? And we can discuss that in other forums or later in Q&A. One of the aspects that has intrigued me relates to what we've been talking about, and what I saw with Mr. Crombie's example. Conrad Wolfram is one of the luminaries in Wolfram Alpha. Stephen Wolfram wrote Mathematica, and they have with Wolfram Alpha a computational search engine and a knowledge engine. He makes the observation in this book that's recent, in real world math, computers do all the calculating. By contrast, in educational math, people do almost all the calculating. No mainstream school maths curriculum has yet been based on the obvious assumption that computers exist. And I think that is a place that we can be going, because much of what I learned through calculus and other courses were tricks from how to get to the beginning to the end. I knew what I wanted to do with it. I knew what I needed, but you had to know so many special identities, relationships, decompositions in order to get to the step-by-step result. If we take what Conrad Wolfram had observed in his book, we can relate it also to learning by reading. With grades 1, 2, 3, we're taught how to learn to read, but then after grade 3, we read to learn. That's why it's so pivotal that if someone can't read by grade 3, they just fall further and further behind and have a high risk of not finishing school. Similarly, I would argue, and I have had pushback from people I have respect for, we learn to compute. That is, we learn all of these identities and these tricks and how to do various substitutions and calculations for solution. And then we compute to learn. We learn new math, new applications, etc. However, I think there is something to be gained from the software that is available, the Wolfram Alpha. One of my respected colleagues who is a leader in math pedagogy and a professor in the Division of Science, Information Arts, and Technology at the University of Baltimore, Dr. Haitham Al-Khatib, has used Wolfram Alpha as a computational tool to support the teaching. One of the ways that you can do this, it takes a little more time than we have today, is that if you say what the problem is, let's say in a question bar, you can step by step have revealed what's the next step, and you can probe for additional answers. So it gives the opportunity for the student not just to see, I can put this in and this black box spits out the answer, but that when I put this in, it can walk me through serially where I might have had my learning arrested. He said that in his experience, it was helpful when attempting to improve that procedural calculation knowledge that mathematics so often requires. If we look in two different professors from Stanford University, we see the observation from Keith Devlin. Dr. Devlin is discussing calculus, the beauty of calculus, and how it's sometimes obscured for people who stop their math education too soon. In this lecture series that is hot linked at the bottom, he says, when you go through the development of what can then be formulaic or algorithmic in solving calculus, the intermediate steps, which took a lot of time to learn, they go away. And over time, if you were to press someone who would be perhaps competent in the uses of the methods of calculus, by the way, let's go to first principles, and can you produce this rule that you just used for performing a derivative or an integral? They might be stumped to do so. And the point is they don't need to do so. So somewhere between having adequate grounding and somewhere between having thorough procedural ability, I think lies an opportunity to focus on what is the result and what are the concepts that we need. That's my plea. What we have from a different set of professors at Stanford concerns mindset. Does the professor fundamentally believe that the ability that somebody has is fixed? That would be a fixed mindset. Or is it something that can grow, can change over time? That would be a growth mindset. Dr. Bolar has done extensive work on growth mindsets, specifically in mathematics. I would say what I found particularly interesting as I've started reading Mathematics for Equity first is the role that the instructor or the teacher has and what the expectation of the teacher has, and what my colleagues on the panel have talked about with collaborative work with the students. So with mathematical mindset, summarizing a few critical points, although there's much rich information to be mined in both of those books, that classroom and home strategies, they can give students experiences that allow them, if they have fixed mindsets, to evolve, to have more of a growth and mathematical mindset. But these have to be planned and intentional experiences. That's the first part. And then the second part is to appreciate that math is a subject of growth and that their role is to learn and think about new ideas. And part of that, with thinking with new ideas, when you first try, of course, it's like riding a bike or learning roller skates. You stumble, you fall, and there's feedback learning, which is what I've come to call a lot of things when I give an assignment back. Then there's the aha moment. It didn't come before, but it came then. So now my gallery is blocking my reading. There. If we look in the book that was edited in part by Ms. Woodbury, we see that there are guides for complex instruction to create equitable classrooms, and by equitable, to make an open space for all. And something that I hadn't thought as explicitly about till I started reading her work and that of Dr. Bolar is the role that status outside the classroom occupies within the classroom, what the expectations are or are not. And for an equitable classroom, the instructor in a planned and intentional way would want to create equal status interactions while developing challenging learning tasks. One of the aspects of radical equations that I took away is that Mr. Moses expected that students would understand this is hard. This is going to take work, but it's going to be worth it. Did I get that right, Bill?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So with Wolfram Alpha, I want to make the point for the archival purposes, for our audience and my colleagues, it isn't just for math education. This is for quantification and using numeracy, math literacy beyond that. So we can go to other subject matters. However, my caution, no comment on your work, Dr. Liu, is that with AI, while it can empower students and professors, I'm thinking of ChatGPT at the moment. This is from the Kenner Batcape. It's an actual toy, and they thought it was necessary to caution for play. Ape does not enable user to fly. So AI probably should come with some warnings. When I ran a question about who I am with ChatGPT, I found out, unfortunately, I passed in 2011, but before I did, I was this valuable professor in the School of Law at the University of Baltimore. It's certainly not true. So, Jared, I think I'm done. And if I turn off my share screen, we can come back. And what I would like to do in the few minutes that are remaining is to ask if there are any questions from our attendees, our participants, if you would put those in the Q&A box. And if there are any observations or questions of your colleagues on the panel that either Jing or Bill have. I've been surprised sometimes when I've taught at what might be presumably called elite universities, like top 25 globally, et cetera. When I open it up to questions, sometimes these are the answers to that. So we only have 7 minutes left, but I would like, Bill, yes.
Yes, I was thinking, I processed rather slowly. Let me tell you something about discourse, the kind of discourse in the classroom that we're trying to build. And as we were saying, we start with the concrete experience, say, you know, a trip on a subway, on a bus. The kids come back, they make a mural or a picture of it. They, you know, write about what they saw was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Those discussions don't sound like they have any explicit mathematical content, but the teacher really facilitates, I guess you could call it a reflection and an inquiry into that people talk, into that ordinary language. And for example, one of the pieces, one of the pearls that comes out is that if you're thinking about the features that make up a trip, right? Among other things, but a trip starts someplace, it has movement, and it finishes someplace. Now, it turns out that those three features are in one-to-one exact correspondence with what mathematicians call a vector. The kids are talking about a vector, but they're using kind of culturally embedded terminology. And I'm wondering around the processing of language which isn't explicitly mathematical, but bears isomorphic concepts, which the students will eventually, right, cast as mathematics. If that's to be successful, the teacher needs to help the students form the ideas culturally in context before they're named explicitly in the mathematics. And I'm wondering how the AI handles that translation dilemma.
That's a great question. I think we are not there yet, but it's definitely one aspiration we have to we have an aspiration to go there to capture culturally relevant pedagogy, right? So we are kind of ambitious in terms of building measures about equity. I think what you just mentioned is one of them. And there are other aspects of equity that are equally hard to measure. Things like who are participating in the conversation, who got uptake from the teacher rather than someone else, right? So whether teachers attribute students as mathematicians, like treating them as equal rather than the teacher is authority and all students are inferior in terms of intellectual capacity. So there are all those different conceptualizations of equity. I think that's very hard to capture by AI. But we are now working with scholars who are really deep in that field and try to see, okay, whether by having experts like evaluate classroom verbal conversation between the teacher and student, whether they can identify those scenarios, these cases. Once we are able to identify those scenarios with precision, then let's try to train the AI model to capture that. So that's kind of how we go through this process. But I think the initial conceptualization in terms of what counts as culturally relevant pedagogy, what counts as equity related instructional moves is really important, because without knowing that, if human beings cannot recognize that, machine cannot recognize that. So that's why I mentioned that we really need to start with collecting high quality data, then we can really do this foundational work to define and capture those scenarios, then we can do the AI part. So the AI comes as a last step, and all the initial work needs to be done first. Yeah.
Okay, good.
If I could, this will probably be our last question. It's from Dr. Beatrice Laumann, and she asks, which I think is a quite challenging question: how can we balance in the current educational context the perceived need to cover, quote unquote, cover numerous topics with the tremendous value of going in depth, that is, developing students' thinking, et cetera? Bill or Jing, whomever wants to take that first.
I'm long-winded. You should probably.
But they're real gems in there, Bill. Jing, do you have any insight in that? Is that outside the domain of what you are pursuing with your MPT?
Yeah. So one thing that's a little bit related as we are developing measures on students' mathematical reasoning. So we are trying to capture that reasoning process, how students are using mathematical concepts and language to reason about what they observe in life, etc. So we are only at the very beginning stage of that. So I personally I'm not a math educator, or I'm also not a mathematics education researcher. So I see mathematics education as one context I can apply the AI tool. So I'm not super qualified to answer the question, but I just want to mention, like, we are actually doing something to capture which this colleague is mentioning.
While Bill is still formulating, I'm not saying it is the answer, but it is part of an answer. I think that the combination that's recently been discussed by Conrad Wolfram on his blog of having ChatGPT and Wolfram Alpha come together fills a key weakness of ChatGPT and provides something that might be more broadly useful than as an individualized tutor of sorts that's more reliable than ChatGPT would, because it was so weak in math. It was so susceptible to hallucination and wrong answers. Bill, did I give you enough time to formulate?
Yeah, I think I have one. Could you ask the question again so I can make sure I'm not answering another question?
Sure. It's basically about levels of expectation. How can we balance in the current educational context the perceived need to cover numerous topics, like you've got to cover these over the curriculum in this order, with the tremendous value of going in depth in developing students' thinking?
So I think there's a presupposition there, which is mistaken. One of the amazing things about Common Core when it came out, if you got the original document, on each page in the upper right-hand corner, they had the mathematical practices, right? And my heretical position is, I think that they should have switched the position. What we don't teach is mathematical practice. We teach content, and as a matter of fact, teachers will put in the unenviable position of teaching students a practice which was never developed in their undergraduate career as teachers. So they're somehow incorporating a practice into these young people that they never had the opportunity to incorporate at the end. I think if our focus was on developing the mathematical practice of students as opposed to a long content list, which if you talk to any teacher, they say, we can't cover all that. Students would be able to apply that practice to whatever content they needed. But we have it reversed, where we think the emphasis is on content. Oh yeah, and if you want them to learn it well, have them do these 7 or 8 things. So I'm not saying that's easy. The only way we know of establishing a practice as a discipline is 5 to 10 years of apprenticeship. Now, maybe AI can figure out how to do that quicker. But I think the issue there is reversing the relationship between practice and content. But it's an interesting question, indeed.
Well, it is. If we take economics as example, there is an approach which the former Fed chair, Ben Bernanke, when he was at Princeton, and I think it was Robert Frank when he was either Columbia or Cornell, and they took the encyclopedic Economics 1, Economics 2, 101, 102, huge books. And they are typically taught for the 3% of people who are going to go on and be economists, lines, graphs, charts, et cetera. And they taught it differently. They taught it more conceptually, because surveys demonstrated that even for the most basic ideas, people who had not taken Economics 101 and 102 scored better than people who had taken. I can give follow-up information if anybody's interested. I've written a few things, or I've written some around this. Before, if I could take moderator's prerogative before we go off air and say thank you again so much to each of you. It wouldn't have been possible without. And I want to thank those who have helped me expand my learning. I'm hopeful that there will be funding to do this again next year. It seems to me a critical aspect of this is the learner, is the student, and beginning with that. And what I have seen in terms of approaches for equity and dealing with mindset, that would be a profitable place to begin, because sometimes I have experienced over the decades, the biggest challenge is not that this person can't learn this, it's that they are convinced they can't learn this. and it doesn't open up. So having said that, if there's anyone in the listening afterwards in the archive or attending now who would like to reach out and share ideas, collaborate, discuss other resources, please let me know if I can broker anything with networks. As you look at our past 2 years, the recorded webinars are on the website for today's webinar. And once this recording is done, it will be transcribed and uploaded. So all 3 years for each of the persons and what they brought will be available. I know I'm long-winded, Bill. I'm not trying to compete. So I'm going to say, I have one more Q&A. So Dr. Laumann says, thank you, great point. So Bill, good. Let's conclude on a win.
Very good.
Take care, my friends.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.